This podcast contains our own personal views not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. All right, welcome back, everyone.
Thanks.
I'm
Sorry, I was drinking my wine.
Sorry, I should not have interrupted the wine drinking. That's on me. So I'm pretty excited about this one. You know, I've been holding on to it for ages in terms of follow-up from Alice, your last story with the hypothermia, so getting too cold, too chilly. This one does involve the death of a young man due to heat stroke. I was going to sort of present this week's where I chat through the story because it's quite detailed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll come back to worries and issues identified by the coroner. But at least with this one, there's not really recommendations as such because a lot of the issues had essentially already been rectified by the time the inquest was released. So that's, I think, one really beneficial part of this case. And so the reason why I'm presenting it is because of the heroic efforts of those people involved.
Mm-hmm.
There was just an amazing team of people trying to look out for this young man to try and get him care. And look, they weren't successful, but they went above and beyond. And so I think that's really something worth highlighting. I'll be discussing the death of Ewan Williamson, who was a 14-year-old boy when he died from severe heat stroke following hiking with his father in the Badgira Walk. Apologies if that's not the pronunciation. I'm just reading it as it's spelt. In the Cape Range National Park, 25 kilometres south of Exmouth in Western Australia. Exmouth, that one.
That's a big one.
Yeah, I know. And even though I know it's Exmouth, because it's written Exmouth, I just read it and didn't think. Ewan's death was reported to the coroner as it was unexpected. And furthermore, it was investigated by the coroner to assess the actions of the police who took the first call for assistance from Ewan's father. So Ewan, he was an average 14-year-old boy. He was healthy. He enjoyed playing sport. He did actually usually reside in Scotland with his mother, but kept in contact and occasionally visited his father, who resided in Geraldton, WA, which is 4 hours north of Perth. For those who don't know, I didn't. I had to Google it.
I've been there. It is a long drive.
He travelled to Australia from Scotland, arriving on the 16th of December 2012 to visit his father over the Christmas holidays. In the week prior to his travel, Ewan had suffered from a minor head cold, which has resulted in his absence from school, but did not require he or his mother to seek medical advice. On arrival to Australia, he appeared to have recovered from this illness and didn't have any ongoing concerns. As part of this visit, Ewan and his father discussed spending some time off-road driving, and hence, a few days after his arrival, the pair travelled north to Exmouth for a holiday. Whilst on this trip, on December 21st, they decided to take a walk at the Badgira Trail, arriving at the trail around 10 a.m. On arrival, the pair noted the signage that warned them of high temperatures and about the safety of the walk. This sign included advice that extreme heat can be experienced when walking Cape Range. Temperatures can regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius during the months of November to March.
Wow.
It is recommended you walk in cooler months or during cooler times of the day. Furthermore, the trail was described as a moderately difficult walk that would be around 3 hours to complete. Hence, it was intended that Ewan and his father completed just a brief walk, then turned back towards the car park.
So they weren't going to do the full loop?
The plan was just to go sightseeing, see a little bit, and then head back.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And sorry if I missed it. What time of day was this?
They arrived at 10 a.m. to start the walk.
Okay. So
That sounds hot already.
yeah, that's a warm part of the day.
December.
Starting to get warm.
Yeah, I think it
Mid-December.
already would have been incredibly warm. With this in mind, the fact that they were going to have a brief walk and that it was hot season, they carried 2 litres of water each. Oh, here we go. It was 36 degrees when they commenced their walk.
Oh,
Yeah, that's getting up there.
I don't like to leave the house when it's 36 degrees, let alone
Go
take
for a
a bush
walk.
walk.
Especially if he's from Scotland, coming out of
Yes.
the Scottish
I was
winter,
just thinking that.
Yeah,
coming to 36-degree weather and going on a walk.
seems hot.
Yeah, that's an
acclimatization.
temperature shock for your body.
Yes. Ewan was dressed in a t-shirt, shorts, and a wide brim hat. And I presume walking shoes. Sorry.
Barefoot.
They didn't mention his shoes. The trail at the start of the walk is steep, rocky, and very narrow, with portions that allow only enough room for one person to walk along. As well as this, there are some portions that have steep drops off to one side and require some climbing along rock faces. So not entirely a casual walk
What's that
either.
called again? I think it's called scrambling. When
Oh,
you
does
do
that have a name?
I think so, when you have to climb along a rock face. It's called
Interesting.
scrambling.
Okay, I'll believe you on this one.
I hope so. I hope that's what it's called.
I would have called it just rock climbing, but fine.
This isn't sounding appealing so far.
I agree.
Yeah.
Within 60 to 90 minutes of beginning the walk, Ewan mentioned to his father that he felt faint. At this point, they found a small cave for shade where Ewan sat and consumed most of the water they'd brought with them.
Wow.
Following this, Ewan...
They brought with them, so almost
So 4 litres.
Yeah, almost 4 litres.
Wow.
Yeah, not just his portion.
It's going to make you feel very unwell.
Yes and no, because I think he's already feeling unwell from his
dehydrated,
heat stroke.
yeah. It's just a lot of
so-
liquid to be sitting in your stomach.
Yes.
You know, that feeling of...
Yeah, I definitely know. But again, when you're so thirsty like that, I
Yeah.
think Following drinking this water and having a little bit of sit down, Ewan improved, and so they began their walk again, but this time intending to go back to the car.
Yeah.
Cool.
Given
I was
the
going
heat
to
of the
say,
day.
surely you turn around at that point.
However, following leaving the trail to seek this shade, they unfortunately progressed further along the trail.
Oh, they walked the wrong way.
Oh,
They
no.
absolutely walked the wrong way.
If I was alone, this would definitely happen to me, because if I walk into a shop and
I'm
then I
the
come
same,
back
I always
out
walk
again,
the wrong way
I'll
back
go
out
the
of
wrong
shop.
way.
Yep.
I get disoriented.
Yep.
I can absolutely understand how they went the wrong way.
Yeah, me
I do this all the time, and especially when I bushwalk, because I'm like, well, that's a tree, and that's a tree.
They all
I
look the
came
same.
past that one.
Yep.
So over the next 60 minutes, Ewan and his father unfortunately walked a further almost 2 kilometres along the trail. During this walk, they set a reasonable pace, given their understanding was that they were heading towards the car.
Yeah. Oh, that feeling when you realise that you're actually further away than when you...
So it was a circuit that they accidentally completed, and hence it brought them back to where they had first rested in the cave.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. So not even like back to the car, but back to... Oh.
And at that point, they were approximately 800 metres from the car park.
Okay.
So it was so strenuous that the first 800 metres made him feel faint, and they sat down.
And it
then
took
they,
him 60 to 90 minutes just to do 800 metres.
Yes, and then they paced 2 kilometres over 60 minutes to get back to the car, which actually brought them back to the bit to start that really difficult journey. Which I find interesting, because surely they would have been like, this isn't the way we came. But either way, they're now exerting even more energy. They've got no water left. And they're still 800 metres away from the car, which doesn't sound that hard, but actually took them 60 to 90 minutes to do.
Get it.
And you would also think, like, maybe they did realise sooner, but they knew it was a circuit.
Maybe.
So they figured, well, we might be actually
Better pressing
closer.
on. Yeah,
Yeah.
true. It doesn't mention that. And yeah, it's hard to know what they, like, also thought processing may not have been as great
Yeah,
at that
true,
point
if
where you're
you're
starting to get a bit
dehydrated.
stressed and worried about what's going on. So once they're back on the right trail, Ewan walked another 400 metres, so made himself back to 400 metres away from the car before he was unable to walk any further. And by this time, it was approximately 1:30 p.m. So really getting to that heat of the day. Because he was unable to walk any further, Ewan's father decided to head back to the car to grab supplies. So found a spot for Ewan to sit, which had some stability and some shade, but not completely shaded. And at this point, Ewan was conscious and breathing, but slightly disoriented. And at this point, Ewan's father began realising he wasn't going to be able to carry Ewan from where he was placed to the car himself. So once Ewan's father reached the car, he elected to call emergency services and ask for assistance. Side note, the reason why he felt he wouldn't be able to carry Ewan was even though he was 14, he was the size of an adult. He weighed 84 kilos. He was...
A big boy.
Yeah, he was well grown, so he wasn't going to be easy to get out
I wonder as well, like, would there even have been phone reception
along the trail.
along
as
the
well.
trail?
Part of this makes me also wonder, did they just leave the phone in the car
Yeah,
as
that's
well?
what I was wondering. Did he have his phone on him while he was on the trail?
So Ewan's father arrived to their car at around 2 p.m. and noted that the temperature on the dash was 42 degrees. So It's getting pretty hot during this day as well.
And that's inside the car.
The guy's been sitting, in the sun.
Yeah. So, but it's still hot.
At this stage, he did not consider the situation to be life-threatening, but rather was seeking assistance by the way of additional people or possible stretcher to convey Ewan to the car. And so following this phone call, he returned to Ewan with a further 5 litres of water that they'd left in the car and the windshield sunshade to cover Ewan with.
That's a good idea.
On arrival back to Ewan, it was about 2:30, so it had been half an hour, or a bit longer.
Been an hour.
Of the day.
Yeah, almost.
Because it would have taken him, about half an hour to get to the car and then half an hour to get back.
Yeah, he left Ewan at 1:30, arrived back at 2:30. His father found him semi-conscious with laboured breathing. His father attempted to cool him by pouring the water all over him and by covering him with the shade. And then called emergency services again, this time requesting an ambulance. He then placed Ewan in the recovery position and attempted to cool Ewan's body as best he could. So the police officers arrived at the trail car park at approximately 3 p.m. and the officers carried water with them as much as they could physically carry and set off to find Ewan and his father, with their initial plan being to hydrate Ewan, bring him back to their air-conditioned vehicle where they'd wait for the ambulance or consider driving to meet the ambulance along the way.
Right, so then at this point they're not thinking it's too dangerous or too
because they know about the first phone call that Ewan's father made that was just saying, hey, I just need some help getting my son. Could we get a stretcher or something like that?
Right, they weren't made aware of the second phone call.
No. When they arrived, they realised things were much more serious and ultimately decided that their plan just needed to be to get Ewan out as fast as possible. Just he needed to get to somewhere that was cooler. So they started initially by placing Ewan in a fireman's carry over one of the police officers' shoulders. So head on one side, legs on the other side, over this guy's shoulders.
Wow, that would have been a lot to carry an 84 kilo.
And in that
over your shoulder,
steep terrain as well.
Steep terrain, 84 kilo 14-year-old who's probably not going to be super cooperative. So it's like carrying essentially dead weight in 42 degree heat.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly difficult. So they're only able to make it an extra 40 metres along the trail before this officer required rest. So it was that exhausting that he could only make it 40 paces along before they had to put him down again. So they made the call to ensure that an ambulance was attending as a priority, which meant that one of the officers had to go to get mobile reception to make sure that that was occurring. And then they again continued by incrementally lifting Ewan, going as far as they could, putting him down, and continuing to do that. Oh, and when he was then on the ground, they were cooling him with the water that they'd carried. By approximately 3:25, one of the police officers left Ewan and the father and the other police officer to head back to the trail car park so that they could meet any further assistance and take them to where he was. And when that police officer arrived back at the car park, he encountered ambulance officers and 2 Department of Environment and Conservation staff.
Oh, good.
So these ambulance officers were volunteers that worked in that area, and they arrived around 3:30. So this is 2 hours after Ewan's essentially collapsed and sat down. By this point, Ewan was cyanotic, so bluish discoloration of the skin due to deficient oxygenation of the blood. So his body's really starting to shut down. His pupils were dilated, he was unresponsive, and he had a weak pulse. The ambulance officers applied oxygen, and further attempts were made to cool Ewan with cool packs and water that had been provided as well. Further equipment was also carried to him by one of the Department of Environment and Conservation staff, who also happened to be a volunteer ambulance officer. So that was somewhat convenient that they had extra medical expertise along the way. Yeah. So they ultimately decided that they would try and stretcher him out. But as they lifted the stretcher, he stopped breathing. So they then had to commence CPR. Because he was so damp, they elected not to use a defibrillator. And so they then had to try to negotiate the priority of CPR along with extricating him. And ultimately they decided that they would lift the stretcher, move 6 paces and drop the stretcher and then continue to provide CPR for a period of time and then repeat that.
And it doesn't sound like this was a flat trail as well, so that would be making it even harder.
Yes, absolutely. And so they continued this until they got him out of the trail. The CPR attempts were complicated by the heat, causing significant fatigue to those involved. And one police officer described the heat being so intense that whilst kneeling to perform CPR, he felt burning through his clothes from the rocks on the ground.
Yeah.
Yep. Which then Ewan's lying on that ground.
Absolutely. Ewan's lying on
Yeah,
ground.
I mean, he's
that's
on a
hot.
stretcher, but that's still not...
It's still going to come through.
Yeah.
It's not providing him. And the whole time, though, from the moment he sat down and was left, he was on scalding rocks, essentially. So his ability to cool himself, even whilst in the shade, was hampered by the environment that was around him the whole time. So there was really no way for him to get cooler significantly with the measures that they had available to them to provide to him. So along the way, again, more police officers were able to show up, provide assistance, but it was still incredibly difficult, incredibly fatiguing. And furthermore, Ewan's father was even required to be led to the car park so that he could be settled from his heat-related
Yeah, because I imagine
well.
he would be so stressed. Like, he's been walking for a really long time now, trying to provide care to his son.
He's had no water.
Yeah,
Because
he's
Ewan drank
used it all. Yeah.
Well, he might have had some. Someone might have offered some along the way. But yeah, so even others were starting to show signs of heat stress and heat illness.
Just the stress on top of it as well.
So that took them ultimately another half an hour. So they made it to the car park around 4 p.m. And this was an hour after the police officers arrived and 30 minutes after the ambulance officers. So with more hands, more things were able to be achieved and they got out of that situation. But as we said before, only about 400 metres did they actually have to move, and that's how challenging it was to do.
Wow.
Following getting off the trail, there was a convoy of the police and ambulance vehicles, and Ewan was transported to the Exmouth District Hospital as quickly as possible. CPR was continued during the transport, and at one stage they attempted to use the defibrillator, but he did not have a shockable rhythm. At no point did he have a pulse during this trip to hospital, and he remained unconscious with pupils fully dilated and non-responsive.
Was his dad with him in the ambulance?
It didn't say, but I presume so. Like, yes, he came off the trail to get treated, but I assume he then went to the hospital. Yeah. Ewan arrived at the hospital at approximately 4:30, so another half an hour later, where the medical team had prepared for him because they had a call through from the police along the way. Ewan had resuscitation attempts performed at the hospital for an hour, but despite this, he had no signs of life and was declared deceased at 5:30 p.m.
That's crazy.
I'm just thinking about his poor dad.
That's a really
Poor
bad
father.
day and a bad, like, just that, again.
And he was just hanging out with his son, who he hadn't seen, who'd come from Scotland.
Wanted to take him on a nice, little hike
Yep.
to see the sights and...
Well, little holiday. They'd driven from Geraldton to Exmouth. Like, that's a solid drive.
Yeah. Just wanted to spend some time with his son and then to be going through this and watching his son decline like that.
And it's the 21st of December, which is just like to then
And his
around
poor
Christmas
mother
holidays.
back in
Yeah,
Scotland.
having to call
Yeah.
his mother and
be like,
tell
this has
her.
happened.
Absolutely.
Her being so far away. Oh,
It's absolutely devastating. And all from such good intent. Like, there was so much good intent, but just, you take a wrong turn, you're not quite well enough supplied. Like, there was mention in this coroner's report of, shorts and a t-shirt and a broad brim hat in 40-degree weather along a trail. It's not appropriate. Like, you need to be more prepared with potentially longer sleeve items that are going to protect you from the sun and the burning and that kind of thing. So, they very much underestimated the risks of taking this trail.
Yeah.
and even the fact that there were warning signs saying don't walk along here during the hottest part of the day, which 10 a.m. is getting into the hottest part of the day. I mean, they're essentially there from the hot, 10 a.m. till 4 p.m.
4 p.m.
That's the hottest hours of the day.
I wonder though if they thought, oh, we'll just go a little way along and then come back. They were planning on only walking for maybe half an hour, then turning back, and therefore being back at the car at 11. But because it took them so long to get a short distance,
They potentially decided to press
we'll
on for
just go a
longer.
little bit further.
Yeah, it's
And
hard to
maybe
know.
not even realised how long they'd been out there for.
Yeah, if they're just talking, having a good time.
Exactly as well. And you don't know how quickly that sort of came across Ewan as well. You know, feeling good,
yeah, he
feeling
might
good,
have been
feeling good, and then all of a
totally
sudden he was like, oh no, I feel bad.
Yeah.
So, or he might have been trying to persist. He might have been trying not to whinge, complain.
Especially being like a young kid, like sporty, athletic.
He's a 14-year-old boy. He doesn't want to show that he's having trouble along a hike. Yeah.
No, that his dad is just leading the way, you know, not having any trouble in.
Yeah, and Ewan's father might be far more acclimatized to hiking in these kinds of conditions.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's hard to know entirely how it got to that stage. So an autopsy was performed after Ewan's death, and it concluded that his death was consistent with heat stroke. Interestingly, though, focal myocarditis, which is a small focus of inflammation in the heart, was identified during the autopsy. So there's a thought that this may have been as a result of the recent illness that had occurred prior to his travel to Australia. The pathologist performing the autopsy was unable to establish the degree that the myocarditis contributed to his death, but it is known to cause sudden death due to damaged heart muscle being more vulnerable to abnormal rhythms, particularly with stresses such as heat stroke.
Is that something that generally happens when you have a cold? You get like a little bit of heart inflammation?
It's hard to tell if that happens because I guess
we don't check it.
We don't do an autopsy to check for the inflammation of the heart. It can happen with viral illnesses though. So it can be something that happens with a cold or a specific set of viruses and those kinds of things. Or
well, I guess, I mean, not to get too hot topic, but COVID, don't
exactly.
they say that there's heart issues associated with it? Maybe it's
with it.
Oh,
yeah, so potentially that was an unknown factor in that illness that he had. And that's not unreasonable to have not
known about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, putting him at a more vulnerable state for this to have happened as well, which again, if you don't know that you're in a vulnerable state,
if you
makes
feel
it hard
fine
to prevent it. Oh, would you guys like to chat some fun facts about heat stroke?
Yes.
I really enjoyed the expert witness, the detailed heat stroke, because I learnt a lot, and so I would love to educate you all. Heat stroke is defined as a body temperature above 41 degrees, which leads to dysfunction of the brain and nervous system.
And what's a normal body temperature?
Somewhere around 35, 36. It's probably more like 36 to 38 is a normal body temperature.
You're 41 significantly higher than what you should be.
Yes. A fever when you're unwell and have a high temperature is defined above 38 degrees generally.
Right.
There's some arguments there. And even there are some arguments around heat stroke and 41 versus 41.5. But ultimately, your cells don't function well when you start getting into those 40 range temperatures.
Okay.
So high temperatures usually lead to lethargy, unwillingness to continue exertion, and uncooperativeness, which is what we saw in Ewan. As the disease progresses, the individual becomes unconscious, may have seizures, and depression of conscious state that may result in slow breathing. Heat may be generated in an individual due to exertion in a combination with external heat sources. In Ewan's case being the solar radiation and the surfaces he was in contact with, which we talked about. He was on the hot ground, he was on the hot stretcher. Everything was causing external heat to him. And so, yes, he had stopped the exertion portion of it, but he wasn't able to cool himself down effectively still. Treatment involves reducing individuals' core body temperature to that of normal limits. And this may be achieved through water immersion, fanning, ice packs, room cooling where available. And in hospitals, there are some further steps that you can take. The expert witness held the opinion that the prospect of Ewan surviving became very unlikely at the point where he went into cardiac arrest. However, loss of consciousness does not necessarily suggest a grave prognosis if cooling therapies can be undertaken. So the prognosis really only became so grave once he arrested, which then kind of in the inquest they sort of talked about, well, should they have progressed or continued with that CPR once he arrived at the hospital? Should they have continued that when they already knew the prognosis was incredibly grave? But he's a 14-year-old boy and it's really hard.
They're doing everything they can to save him. I don't think that's unreasonable.
Exactly. So it was very much sort of like I'm just going to put this point in here, but realistically, that's not the way that people's emotions are going to work.
Yeah, so the family's not going to be upset that they tried hard, for longer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But then that also means in theory, so he was at a point of return or recovery,
Yeah.
all the way through until they were sort of carrying him off and he went
Potentially.
into cardiac arrest. But I don't think they could have done anything differently, to be honest.
So there's a bit that I sort of not glossed over, but just sort of didn't go into deep detail about that I will bring up now as the things that went through in the inquest in terms of could have been improved for Ewan's care. So ultimately, when Ewan's father made the very first phone call, when it was just, hey, I need a bit of help, my son, I can't get him out, I think he'll need like a bit of extra hands and a stretcher. The constable who took this call had difficulty understanding Ewan's father's Scottish accent and difficulty hearing due to the ambient noise around him in the office that the police officer was working.
Right.
So that phone call was difficult, took longer than expected, and had multiple communication issues that were further exacerbated by the fact that the officer taking the call was in Perth and so didn't have a local knowledge of northern WA, Western Australia, whilst Ewan's father had assumed that that person was local and in fact did know information.
What he was talking about.
Yeah, he might have been even giving
location.
directions to where they were. Like, yeah, we're just in the car park of blah, blah, blah. And the guy in Perth is just thinking,
I'm like 2,000
okay.
kilometres away, I don't know.
Yeah.
Hopefully someone in the area knows what you're talking about, but I don't.
Yeah, so stating the Bajira trail, he had to spell it out. And
Right, and with an accent, I
Yes.
can imagine that would have been
yes, difficult.
interesting.
By the end of the phone call, the constable had the understanding of that Ewan was unable to progress further, and so it stated he would organise something for them, but didn't state anything more specific than that. And the senior constable didn't seek any assistance from anyone else around. I can't tell what this guy's saying. Can someone help me? I can't hear appropriately, that kind of stuff. He just pressed on with the phone call. Following that, he recorded the details of the phone call onto the computer system, which is used statewide, and that then has a priority alert system to then go to the local locations to update them. And so once it's logged in Perth, it's received in Exmouth and can be accessed by them. So there was an internal affairs investigation after this, which became quite critical of the fact that the constable didn't enter the details at the time that he was taking the phone call, that he in fact wrote them down and then into the computer system.
And he wasn't able to do it while he was talking on the phone.
Yes.
So do we know the time delay between him taking the phone call?
It was like 5 minutes, so it wasn't.
Okay.
It
It's
wasn't
not
a
like
long
he
time
went
delay.
and got a cup of tea in the meantime.
Yeah, but they have absolutely changed this and said that people must be taking
As you're talking to the person.
absolutely, and that if you can't do that, you should not be working in that position.
Right.
So the information that was entered into the computer system also listed the concern as a welfare check, which gave a priority of 3 out of a 4-category system.
One being priority.
Yes, yes. But the constable did then discuss this with his manager, who then upgraded the priority. But the fact that the constable didn't know appropriate codes for things like a collapsed person and hence didn't use it was also criticised. And so again, further training has been established by the police department to upgrade this education so that those who are, again, if you don't know the codes, you shouldn't be working in that department. So you need to have regular education, and it didn't seem like that had been effective prior to then.
And you kind of wonder, and this is a little bit off topic, but you wonder in the police force, they've obviously got these different departments. If this was an older gentleman, an older constable working, like, was he used to working, in a different department? You just wonder what the transferability in different departments is like and what the training's like. Obviously, it's something that they've worked on since this happened, but...
Agreed. It didn't go into this guy's history. It just said he'd been in the police force for a long time. But you're right.
But in that department?
Yeah, it sounds like he had then ultimately transitioned to this department, but he had been in that department and was working 4 days a week in that role. So he should have, by way of repetitiveness, had better formulated ways to process the information he was gaining from the phone calls.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you can only know what you've been taught, or...
And it might just not be his area of interest or anything like that. He might have just been like, I've just ended up here through happenings of events and I don't really, this isn't my passion. This isn't why I was entered into the police force. I know it's all just conjecture, but...
Yeah. So yeah, it took an ultimate 15 minutes from that initial phone call from Ewan's father before the operator at Exmouth Police Station was informed of that phone call or aware of that phone call. So yes, it was
Wow.
a reasonable delay.
Yeah, okay.
But again, in the context of the total outcome, not seen to be such a timely delay that it was going to have made a significant effect to Ewan's ultimate outcome. And at that point, from that phone call, the understanding was just that Ewan was exhausted, requiring water rest and recuperation. And so they were unaware of how serious it actually was based on what Ewan's father had discussed. And this was also thought to be due to the fact that the constable was in Perth and unaware of what the northern parts of the state's heat in that time of year truly was.
Especially he's sitting in an air-conditioned office.
Well, that's exactly right.
You know, in Perth, where it's not as hot, and not thinking about how hot it would be outside in the north.
Yeah.
That's right. And it also sounds like Ewan's father wasn't as concerned either
At that point
in time.
Yes. Yeah, it certainly sounded like Ewan's father just thought he was exhausted, not
acclimatized.
Not sick.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah. The issue with this miscommunication, though, was that an ambulance wasn't called at that point because everyone's understanding was that it wasn't necessary. And I think it could have been thought of to request earlier.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been thought, well, what's the worst outcome here? What is a potential risk here? And erring on the side of caution and saying we'll just call an ambulance anyway, rather than not. The other thing that happened here is that the constable didn't feel an ambulance was required from the information that Ewan's father conveyed, despite Ewan's father having actually mentioned on the call a request for an airlift.
Oh, wow. And he probably would have been thinking about how steep the climb was when he was thinking about airlifting.
How am I going to get him out of here?
Yeah. The police internal affairs unit was of the opinion that a report of a collapsed person should have resulted in an ambulance being contacted by the police. Based on this information, the coroner felt that the constable who took the initial phone call at around 2 p.m. had sufficient information by 2:10 that he should have been aware to contact an ambulance at this point and to assist with the incident. Despite these issues occurring at the initial call centre, the local Exmouth police officers understood the concerns and set off as a priority. And on their departure, they requested their customer service officer to contact the local ambulance service to ensure their involvement. But by then, Ewan's father had actually contacted the ambulance service himself.
Right. Yeah.
So that, again, further displays that local knowledge meant that those local police officers were like, absolutely, this needs an ambulance. It's hot up here. This kid's, having trouble along this walk. There's absolutely a risk he's going to have heat stroke.
Unless you're there experiencing it or you have experienced it, you don't actually understand like how oppressively hot it is.
Yes. Yeah. And how much being in an open environment affects that as well. Mm-hmm. Pressing on to the ambulance phone call. So Ewan's father's phone call to the ambulance was referred to the local dispatcher in Exmouth. Due to the local knowledge of the dispatcher, the call was quick and information about the severity of the situation was conveyed. But Exmouth doesn't have a local ambulance service. They only have volunteer St John's ambulance officers that are like on call. But luckily they prioritised their attendance and drove lights and sirens as safely as possible to reach Ewan. So they absolutely understood. It took them 20 minutes to get there after that phone call, which is pretty good.
I still think it's kind of wild that they didn't have an ambulance
Well, how big is Exmouth?
station. I don't think it's that small.
Good Google.
Yeah, okay, I will. Just
Just the fact that they're having to rely on volunteers and being volunteers. What happens if there's none of them to respond to the call?
well, they have an on-call service. So
Is it as big as, what was it, Laura?
Surely.
Surely it's
I would
bigger
think it
than
would
Laura.
be bigger.
Exmouth.
Granted, they also didn't have an ambulance station in the town, but
2,486.
Okay,
it's not-
that's
it's not as big as
smaller
we
than I
think.
thought it was.
Yeah. I only know Exmouth because of the solar eclipse, so,
I only know it because of whale sharks.
I just know of it. I don't know how.
Yeah, and Laura didn't have a permanent ambulance.
No,
They
but
just had a health clinic, so
Laura
I get
was
it.
about the same, or a little bit smaller.
No, Laura had a population of 2,000 when the rodeo was on, but it had far less after
Yeah,
outside
like
the rodeo.
400 or something like that.
Yeah.
Does Exmouth have a hospital, like a local hospital?
No, he was he was taken to Exmouth District Hospital.
Okay.
Yeah, so the fact they have a hospital but no
Ambulance service.
ambulance service.
Not everywhere that has a hospital needs an ambulance service, I guess. Like,
I guess not.
if it's a small local community with 2,000 people. But again, it had a volunteer service, remember?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, I just think it's kind of crazy to have to rely on volunteers for that sort of medical care.
Well,
Like, obviously they're very highly trained volunteers, but
yeah.
you're relying on the goodness of the public
Yeah, people
to
who are not
prop
getting
up your
paid.
medical care.
Yes. Fair. That is absolutely true. Oh, and so the question was around, or the look into this was around, did that delay in the ambulance arriving affect anything, and extracting him and those kinds of things, and obviously highlighting that extraction was then further complicated by the 20 minutes delay that they had in terms of that phone call, and because it was sort of, he arrested shortly after the ambulance officers got there, would they have been able to extract him before he arrested and those kinds of things. And ultimately the coroner said that it didn't contribute to the outcome, and that there was such a difficulty in managing priorities with regards to extricating Ewan that those would have occurred no matter how long that ambulance had taken to get there. And then, as I said, the police department have established a dedicated 000 call taker department that requires a course and an annual refresher in training to make sure that those who are taking those calls are efficient and know the right sorts of information to include to ensure that the priority category is appropriate, and that there has been a technological upgrade that helps with that as well, which includes a new computer system for recording incidences, improved mobile service and GPS tracking associated with it, so that they can then also locate that individual that's calling, to make it easier than, I'm on Bajira track, let me just spell that for you with my Scottish accent.
Mm-hmm.
And there also is an emergency app available for smartphones that improves access for that as well.
Yes,
I've
I
seen
did.
ads for those.
Yeah, I did my first aid training earlier this year. And it's really cool because the app then also gives you 3 words that describe your location. So they've basically got a grid of the world, and every segment has 3 or 4 words associated with it.
Wow.
So rather than reading out GPS coordinates, which can be long and annoying, you can just read out
the words.
the
and
words.
are they just random words like sock?
Yeah, so
Yellow.
it's called What 3 Words. I've just pulled up the
Yeah.
Emergency Plus app on my phone.
Wow.
So our current location words.
Okay.
So yeah, you can use those 3 words when you're on the phone to the ambulance or the police if you don't know exactly where you are, and that way it pinpoints it into a certain spot.
I'm imagining Ewan's father with his Scottish
Yeah.
accent
Yeah.
saying these words and being like, how well is that going to work for accents? But that still sounds so much better than GPS coordinates and him trying to spell the track that they were on to someone who was like, I don't know where X is.
And it's 3 meters, 3 square meters.
Oh, so you can go to the other side of the house.
And there'd be
Yeah,
different
it's
words.
that specific.
Can we try it out?
Wow.
I'm really interested.
Yep.
That's crazy. 3
Yeah, and
square
it's just
meters.
amazing
That's
that they've been
different
able to
rooms
do
of your
that.
house.
Yeah, like
Well,
you're
it's big
sitting,
enough,
you're sitting in
yeah.
a different...
Okay, hang on. Let me download the app. What
I don't think you're 3 square meters away from me though.
Well,
Yeah,
you might be in the 3
But
square
yeah, like,
meter
where's the
border.
cutoff? What's it called?
Yeah.
Do you get it on the Emergency Plus app?
So we are in no way affiliated with this app, but I am already saying that you should probably download it.
Yeah, well, that was the recommendation of the first aid trainer.
Yeah.
That it's just so handy even if it's not yourself you're calling for.
Yeah.
If you're at the scene of an accident and you don't know where you are,
True, because
you
I
can
never
just
know
use
where
that.
I am.
Yeah.
Because
I never know what street I'm on. So
No.
this
GPS
is super
tells
helpful.
me where I am.
Gosh, that's a lot of word combination.
Well, the website says What 3 Words has given every 3 square meters in the world a unique 3-word address. The words are randomly assigned to each square and will always stay the same.
Oh.
I also kind of want to walk around the house and write down the 3 words associated with that segment of the house. So if anything goes wrong in the house, I can be like...
Yeah, and you can see how that would be super useful if you're on like a big property that has the same address and you're in the back corner.
Yeah, right. Lastly, the coroner just had a quick look around, Ewan's father requesting an airlift at the very beginning. He said, I think maybe we should consider an airlift for him. And so the coroner just made the point that Generally, airlifts are only approved once police officers have arrived on scene, but they can't generally do this in the first instance from a civilian community member. And even then, the chain of establishing this response is very timely. It wouldn't be any easier or quicker, and police helicopters are generally located in Perth. If you're looking at a helicopter, and an air wing is an even more timely process that would have been too long, not going to have been able to arrive there in that location anyway. So that was essentially an unrealistic option and would not have changed the outcome in this instance. And then finally, looking at the management of heat stroke. And thankfully, the ambulance volunteers and the Department of Environment and Conservation
Got to converse with that environment.
Who happened to be an ambulance officer, all had undergone first aid certificates, and one of the police officers had military experience, which meant that he was also aware of how to treat heat-related illness, and one of the St John's paramedics had also taken a advanced ambulance care course that he had included management of hyperthermia. And so they were all actually, again, conveniently quite experienced in that nature, and so understood what to do. And when we talked about how to manage hyperthermia before, as per the expert witnesses' descriptions, was essentially what they had done. So there was no concern around their management from that perspective. And again, as I've said throughout, either way, I think the efforts that they went to were nothing but heroic. Like, they were willing to be out in that hot environment, kneel on burning, scalding rocks, lift this child over their shoulders and walk him until they were so fatigued that they had to put him down. And they all worked tirelessly in that heat to get him off within 30 minutes. And so I just think that is absolutely phenomenal. Again, police officers doing their job, ambulance officers doing their volunteer job, but still sounds like they all went above and beyond to help him at the scene, which I just think is amazing, considering that they had to lift a child and then put him back down to give him CPR,
an
adult-sized child, to walk him 6 paces, to put him down and do CPR, to then keep doing that for 400 meters would have been exhausting, both physically and emotionally. And I hope that they have gone on to have good debriefing following that and are feeling very comfortable with their efforts and attempts, that they did everything they possibly
definitely
could.
nothing extra they could have done.
So I really liked reading this story to see the actions of people really trying to help someone in need.
For sure.
And whilst the outcome is devastating, I go into reading these knowing that someone has died. So...
Unlike Emma sometimes.
Unlike that one time.
I like that portion of the story. I don't like the story, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Very interesting. And interesting also as a sort of counterpoint to Trevor's hypothermia.
Yes.
And how they are essentially quite similar. You're exposed to the environment and the elements in extreme weather, whether that's hot or cold.
I guess with this one as well, there was more around that information of the steps you could see progressing with Ewan.
Yeah.
Whereas Trevor clearly managed to hide it pretty well, in terms of that he was actually as seriously unwell.
He also wasn't travelling with anyone to
identify that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, this happened across the course of 2 hours. There was 2-hour period of Trevor not being witnessed as well. So,
that's right.
It's that timeliness of how quickly people can go from being relatively reasonably okay to being seriously unwell in such a short period of time from the elements.
Super interesting.
Well, thanks for letting me get so enthusiastic about this case, and I look forward to you guys getting as enthusiastic as I do about other things that you guys have to tell us next time.
Yeah, no, that was very interesting. Thanks for taking us through that.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye.